The fluorescent lights hum above polished linoleum at 2 in the morning. Mercy General's night shift moves at the rhythm of steady breathing machines and the soft click of badge readers. Sarah Chen walks through the corridors with the kind of efficiency that belongs in an operating room during a mass casualty event, not in a Norfolk hospital where the loudest emergency is usually a diabetic in hyperchronic shock. Her badge reads RN, Rare Blood Type Match, Type O Negative in red lettering. She wears scrubs the color of old concrete and moves like someone who has already survived the worst thing that could happen to her. The tremor in her hands when she holds a syringe too long is barely noticeable. Most people don't notice. Most people don't see much of anything about a petite nurse with gray streaking through dark hair and eyes that never quite focus on your face. Dr. Hargrove notices. He watches from the nurse's station as Sarah moves through the O200 pharmaceutical inventory, her fingers tracking quantities on the supply sheet with the precision of someone reading a map in territory where one mistake ends in body bags. The pharmaceutical order for the month lists oxycodone ampules that should correspond to patient census on her ward. They don't. The dosages are inflated by 18%. The patient count hasn't changed. Sarah's jaw tightens. She doesn't circle anything. She doesn't flag the discrepancy. She just makes a small note in the corner of the sheet, so small that most people would call it nothing, would assume she's doodling or calculating her break time. Hargrove has been inflating these orders for 7 months. He has moved approximately $347,000 through ghost patient accounts and pharmaceutical kickback schemes that involve a network of mid-level administrators, 3 insurance companies, and a DEA contact in Richmond who gets paid to look the other way. Sarah Chen's careful attention to the numbers threatens everything. He can see it in the way her eyes don't leave the page. In the way her breathing doesn't change. That's the dangerous part, the absolute stillness that comes from someone trained to move through chaos without broadcasting her internal state. He doesn't see the pair of worn combat boots hidden beneath spare scrubs in her locker. He doesn't see the calluses on her hands. He doesn't see the faded unit patch sewn inside the lining of her jacket, the patch that reads 160th SAW, Night Stalkers, the kind of unit that doesn't exist in official capacity and the kind of deployment that doesn't appear in official records. What Hargrove sees is a liability. A quiet nurse who asks too few questions and pays too much attention. A person who will eventually connect the dots between inflated orders and patient census, and when she does, she will report it up the chain. She will not keep her mouth shut the way the other nurses do. She will not understand that this is how the hospital works, how every institution works, through calculated silence and careful partnerships with people who have power. Sarah finishes the inventory at 0247. She returns to the floor with 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for Marcus, the night resident who hasn't slept in 36 hours and whose hands are starting to shake in a way that concerns her. She doesn't tell him his hands are shaking. She just sets the coffee in front of him and moves to the next patient. This is how she operates, presence without commentary, efficiency without ego. Her phone vibrates at 0301. The caller ID reads Sister. Sarah takes the call in the break room, a grey space that smells like burnt coffee and the kind of loneliness that comes from hospitals at night. Hey, Sarah. Her sister's voice carries the warmth of someone calling from a normal life, a life where people sleep at predictable hours. I know it's late there. I just wanted to check in before my morning meeting. Hey, Marie. Sarah leans against the break room wall, her fingers still moving through muscle memory, checking her watch, counting heartbeats, estimating how long she has before her next vital signs round. Everything good? Yeah. Same chaos at the clinic. I wanted to tell you that Mom's talking about visiting you in Germany next month. I told her September is probably not great for you, but she's already looking at flights. Sarah closes her eyes. The lie is 7 months old now. The lie that she's stationed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The lie that she requested a transfer to a peacekeeping unit. The lie that she didn't discharge because of PTSD so severe that her hands shake when she holds sharp instruments, because she attended the funeral of her only son in Arlington Cemetery while still in uniform, because she couldn't face staying in the military after David bled out in an ambush in Tikrit and she wasn't there to hold his intestines together while waiting for the medevac birds. Yeah, Germany is pretty full in September, Sarah says carefully. Tell her October might be better. That's what I said. But you know, Mom. She wants to see where you live, where you work. She's already talking about booking for 5 weeks. Sarah's breathing doesn't change. The tremor in her hands doesn't intensify. She has been trained for 22 years to separate the emotional center from the autonomic nervous system, to move forward even when every cell in her body wants to stop functioning. I'll call her tomorrow. We can figure it out. Okay, good. I love you, babe. Get some rest. You too. Night shift stuff, not much resting happening right now. She hangs up before Marie can ask more questions. The break room is quiet except for the hum of the vending machine and the distant sound of the intercom crackle. Sarah sets her phone down and stares at her hands. They're steady now. They're always steady when it matters. It's only in the private moments, when she's alone with the weight of what she's hiding, that they betray her. She returns to her rounds at 0317. The ward is quiet, 3 patients in acute care, 2 in recovery, 1 post-op who hasn't woken up yet. She checks the incoming trauma alert system, a habit she maintains even though night shift rarely sees critical arrivals. The monitor blinks with a single incoming patient. Blunt force chest trauma. GSW penetrating the left hemithorax. Critical condition. ETA 12 minutes. The patient is listed as Captain Marcus Morrison, 37, formerly stationed at FOB Shank, Helm and Province. The intake notes read Tikrit operation, friendly fire incident, requested specialist care for rare blood match. Sarah's hands go still. The clipboard falls to her side. Not dropped, set down with the kind of precision that suggests she is still breathing normally, still processing information, still operating at optimal function. But inside, something locks. Something breaks. Something shifts from the place where she has kept it contained since she identified her son's body at the Doverport mortuary. Captain Morrison. David's commanding officer. The man who had called her 6 months ago with a voice like gravel in a tank engine idling, saying, "Your son was under my command. I just wanted you to know he was brave." The last thing he said before the ambush was that he wanted to call you. She has not slept properly since that call. The trauma alert system beeps. ETA now 11 minutes. Sarah looks at the patient blood type on the intake form, O negative, rare, matching exactly the blood type documented on her badge. The intercom will announce this soon. The hospital will call for any available rare blood match in-house. They will find her. They will ask. She will have to decide in the next 11 minutes whether she is willing to give her blood to the man who was with her son when he died, the man who watched David bleed out in the dust 7 miles outside Tikrit, the man who sent his body home in a flag-draped case. She doesn't know yet what she will choose. She moves to the supply room and begins gathering units for the incoming trauma, sterile gauze, pressure dressings, vascular clamps, the equipment of emergency surgery. Her movements are automatic, trained, the kind of precision that belongs to someone who has done this 1,000 times before. Dr. Hargrove passes the supply room and notices her gathering equipment. He notices her face. He notices that her breathing has changed. He notices, for the first time, that beneath the quiet nurse with the tremor in her hands is something else entirely. Something that looks like control. The kind of control that comes from having already sacrificed everything and having nothing left to lose. He doesn't understand yet what he has just witnessed. He doesn't know that he is watching the moment when a woman decides whether to save the man who held her son as he died. He only knows that something in the room just shifted, that the energy of the hospital has changed in a way he doesn't quite understand, that the quiet nurse is suddenly the most dangerous person in the building. The intercom crackles at 0323. Code critical. Incoming trauma. Requesting O negative blood match. All available personnel to Trauma Bay 4. Sarah is already moving toward the Trauma Bay. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is measured. She carries 3 units of O negative and a stack of surgical supplies and something else that no one can see, the weight of every choice she has made that led to this moment. The fluorescent lights hum above her like the sound of helicopter rotors. The linoleum beneath her feet feels like combat dust. The night shift at Mercy General is about to witness something it will spend the rest of the year trying to explain. The morning shift change at Mercy General filled the nurses' station with the sound of exhausted people transitioning into exhausted people. 37 seconds after Sarah hung her coat in the break room, Dr. Hargrove's voice cut through the fluorescent hum like a scalpel through silk. He stood near the medication dispensary, coffee cup raised in one hand, his tailored shirt already wrinkled despite being 8 in the morning. Around him, 7 nurses paused mid-motion. Sarah kept her fingers on the supply cart she'd been restocking, counting gauze packages in her mind to give her hand something to do besides tremble. "I'm giving our new night nurse 1 week," Hargrove announced, his voice pitched for maximum reach. "Before she cracks under pressure. Anyone want to take the over-under?" Laughter rippled through the station like water hitting hot stone. Not mean laughter. Tired laughter. The kind that happens when senior staff need to feel superior to the quiet ones. Sarah didn't look up. Her fingers remained white-knuckled on a box of 4x4 sterile gauze, her jaw clenched so tight she could taste copper. Hargrove's eyes found her across the crowded space for exactly 2 seconds, enough time to confirm that she'd heard, that the humiliation had landed, before he turned back to his audience and smiled like a man who'd just told the cleverest joke in the room. "Night shift does something to people," he continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "Isolation, exhaustion, the weight of watching people die when nobody's watching back. She's got soft hands. Haven't seen calluses like that since nursing school. She won't last." The station fell quiet. Sarah lifted another box from her supply cart, her movement smooth and deliberate, each gesture a brick in the wall she was rebuilding around herself. Her voice remained steady in her own head. "Pain is data. Data is control." She'd learned that in Tikrit when shrapnel had torn through a convoy and she'd kept working through shock because soldiers needed her to keep working. Hargrove's words were nothing. A pebble dropped into an ocean. But she filed them away anyway. 2 days later, the cafeteria's fluorescent lights buzzed their endless drone as Sarah sat alone at a corner table, a cup of black coffee and a tray with lukewarm soup cooling in front of her. She hadn't even lifted the spoon. Around her, groups of nurses and orderlies laughed and complained about shift assignments, their voices blending into white noise. That's when she heard the footsteps, leather dress shoes, deliberate pace, not accidental at all. Hargrove approached from her left side. Sarah saw him in her peripheral vision but didn't look up. That's where she made her first mistake. Not in reaction, but in assumption. In believing that conscious awareness equaled preparedness. His hand came down on her tray from above, a casual motion that looked accidental to anyone not paying attention. His wrist twisted. The bowl of minestrone soup tilted toward the edge of the plastic tray, hung there for a moment like a moment of indecision, then cascaded across the table and down onto the beige linoleum floor. The apple rolled in a wide arc, disappearing under chairs 6 feet away. The spoon clattered like a tiny alarm. "Oh, Christ," Hargrove said, his voice heavy with manufactured sympathy. "Butterfingers today." Sarah didn't respond. Her hands remained on the table, palms down, her breathing steady. Around her, 3 nurses glanced over but quickly looked away. This was Hargrove territory now. This was his show. He bent down and picked up the chart he'd brought with him, the same one he'd been holding moments before, Sarah realized. He'd never planned to eat. He'd planned this moment with the precision of a man who'd rehearsed it in his head. He dropped the chart at her feet, the metal clip hitting linoleum with a sharp metallic echo. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said, his smile white and empty as bone. "Unless those shaky hands can't manage basic tasks. Wouldn't want you fumbling around with actual patients." The room held its breath. Sarah could feel it, the collective pause of people who recognized the line between standard workplace rudeness and something darker. She took one measured breath through her nose, the kind of breath taught to soldiers before they breached a room or faced an interrogator. Then she looked up at Hargrove, and her eyes were like still water, deep and calm and reflecting nothing back. A single tear escaped from her left eye. Just one. She watched Hargrove smile wide and slightly, thinking he'd broken something. She wiped the tear away without blinking, without breaking eye contact, and when she spoke, her voice came out steady as a tank idling in a concrete garage. I've held the intestines of dying men in my hands, Doctor. Men who knew they were going to die and still asked if their buddies were okay. I've packed wounds with gauze soaked in their own blood and kept working for 14 hours straight because people were still bleeding. Your cruelty doesn't even register. The silence that followed was so complete Sarah could hear the refrigerator humming in the break room 15 feet away. Hargrove's smile froze on his face, then slowly began to crack like old paint. He straightened up, stepped back, and walked away without responding. But his hands were trembling. Sarah noticed that. She noticed everything. What Hargrove didn't realize in that moment was that he'd just made a critical error. He'd pushed Sarah Chen in front of witnesses. He'd created a physical scene that multiple people would remember. And more dangerously, he'd confirmed what he'd been suspecting since she started at Mercy General 2 years ago: she was hiding something. The next morning, at 06 for 7 hours, Sarah was paged to Hargrove's office during a code blue response 3 floors up. She should have been in Trauma Bay 2. Instead, she found herself sitting across from his desk, watching him shuffle through papers with the deliberate slowness of a man playing theater. He wrote her up for abandoning her station during a medical emergency, his pen moving with theatrical precision across a personnel form. This has to be documented, he said, not meeting her eyes. For your own protection, of course. We need to establish that you're responsive to protocol. That you follow chain of command. Sarah said nothing. Her hands rested in her lap, steady as surgical instruments. That afternoon, she was restocking the medication dispensary when Hargrove paged her name over the hospital intercom, loud enough that 3 patient families heard it in the adjacent waiting area. He handed her a medication count log, his voice pitched for the audience of family members nearby. Sheikh is going to help me double-check these controlled substance numbers, he said, using the nickname like a brand. We've had some discrepancies in the last quarter. Nothing to worry about, folks. Just routine audits. The family shifted uncomfortably, their eyes finding Sarah. A medication discrepancy suggestion was a synonym for theft suspicion. Hargrove had just broadcast that to strangers without saying the word theft. He was building something. A paper trail. A narrative. A story where Sarah Chen was unstable, unreliable, a liability to Mercy General's credibility. Late that evening, the trauma alert came through at 2,113 hours. All units reported to the ER entrance as the transport helicopter's rotors shook the glass doors like a hand on a door frame. Sarah was stocking the blood supply refrigerator when Dr. Hargrove's voice crackled through the overhead speaker: all trauma personnel to Bay 1. Incoming Special Forces, gunshot wound to the left thorax, single penetrating trauma, en route ETA for minutes. The trauma team mobilized like dancers who'd memorized the choreography. Sarah moved with them, her hands already reaching for the supplies she knew would be needed: 14-gauge angiocath needles, chest tube trays, the level 1 rapid infuser they kept calibrated for exactly these moments. Her muscle memory was still there, deeper than any civilian scrub uniform could cover. Then the helicopter doors opened, and the transport medic wheeled out a gurney with a man whose face Sarah recognized immediately. Captain James Morrison. Fort Bragg. Charlie platoon leader. The same man who'd written her a letter she'd received 3 years ago and never finished reading. The same man who'd held her son as David Chen bled out in an ambush in Fallujah because someone had called in the wrong coordinates and Sarah had been 1,000 miles away. Incoming, the ER attending shouted, already moving. 34-year-old male, Captain James Morrison, 160th SAW liaison, took a round through the left chest at 1847 hours Zulu, was in Tikrit, evac'd immediately, 2 units whole blood running, BP 96/62 and dropping, O2 Sat 89, chest tube placed in field but something's still not right. The trauma team ran. Sarah ran with them, her hands reaching for the emergency equipment, her brain already performing the triage calculation that would determine whether this man lived or died. But underneath the medical protocols, underneath the training that never left her muscles, was a single impossible thought: his blood type. "We've got his labs here," a nurse called out, reading from the portable analyzer. "AB negative. We need AB negative blood, stat. How much do we have?" The blood bank nurse's voice came back through the intercom: 1 unit. 1 pint. That's all we have in stock for that type. We can't get more until the Pentagon's mobile bank arrives from DC, and that's minimum 6 hours out. Sarah's hand stilled for exactly 1/2 second. AB negative. Her blood type. The rarest in the hospital. The type that appeared in less than 1% of the population. The type that she'd maintained since she started at Mercy General, precisely because she'd known, on some level of instinct she couldn't articulate, that someday a patient might need it. She'd never believed it would be him. "I can donate," she said. The words came out before she'd made the conscious decision to speak them. Hargrove, who'd arrived at the bay's threshold in his perpetual attempt to manage the optics of medical crises, turned to look at her. His expression shifted, not from concern to curiosity, but from curiosity to calculation. He watched Sarah walk toward the phlebotomy station, watched her roll up her scrub sleeve to expose the pale skin of her inner forearm, watched her explain her rare blood type to the donation technician with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this before. "How many times have you donated?" the phlebotomy tech asked, pulling up the hospital database. 73 times, Sarah said. "Since I started here 2 years ago. Every 8 weeks, without fail." The tech's eyes widened. 73 times. An average of 9 units of blood, all of it registered under her name. Enough to save someone like Captain Morrison. Enough to have planned for this moment whether she'd admitted it to herself or not. Hargrove's phone was already in his hand. Sarah could see him calculating, reassessing, deciding that a nurse who possessed rare blood and donated it repeatedly and knew military personnel was a risk that required immediate escalation. She watched him step into the hallway, watched him dial, watched his mouth move as he began to speak to someone important enough to take a call during business hours. She didn't try to stop him. The phlebotomy needle went in smoothly, finding the vein without resistance, and Sarah's blood, that precious, irreplaceable AB negative blood, began to flow through clear tubing toward the collection bag. Her pulse stayed steady at 72 beats per minute. Her breathing remained controlled. Her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling tiles above her, counting the acoustic foam squares to keep her mind on something other than the fact that she was giving a piece of herself to the man whose hands had held her son as he died. In the ER bay behind her, the trauma team was preparing Morrison for transport to ICU. She could hear the monitors, the voices, the controlled chaos of people racing against time's gravity. But that wasn't the worst part. The monitor screamed first. Sarah heard it before she saw it, that high-pitched alarm that every nurse learns to recognize in her sleep, the sound that turns your spine into steel. Bed 7, ICU. 02 for 7 hours. The night was about to fracture. She was restocking the medication cart when the overhead speaker crackled, "Trauma alert. 28-year-old male, penetrating thoracic wound, field stabilization attempted, ETA 4 minutes." Her hand stopped moving. "Tickrit." The name came through as a whisper in her chest: Captain James Morrison, 75th Ranger Regiment. The man who had been standing 3 feet away when her son David bled out in an ambush she wasn't there to prevent. The man whose last radio transmission to David's mother was, "He didn't suffer. I was with him." She had never met him until 12 hours ago when they wheeled him in from the airfield, already seeping blood through the field dressing, already fading. His blood type was O negative. So was hers. The rarest match. When Dr. Hargrove had authorized the emergency transfusion, Sarah had sat in the donor chair with a needle in her arm and a weight in her chest that no amount of saline could dilute. 2 units. 20 minutes. her blood flowing into the veins of the man who had held her son as he died. Now that blood was fighting for its life. The ER team moved like a choreography they'd practiced 1,000 times. Sarah watched from the medication room, watched as the stretcher wheeled past with Morrison's body already flagging, his color the shade of wet concrete, his breathing shallow enough to barely fog the oxygen mask. The paramedic was calling vitals, BP 92/58 and dropping, oxygen sat 81%, muffled heart sounds bilaterally, JVD prominent. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardium. The heart's own protective sac had become a prison. She moved toward the ICU without thinking, the medication cart forgotten. Nobody would stop her. Nobody ever did. The quiet nurse was just passing through, just observing, just the woman who made everyone comfortable without demanding anything in return. She positioned herself at the glass wall of bed 7, close enough to see, far enough to not interfere. Morrison's chest was exposed now, the field dressing removed, revealing the entry wound, a penetrating laceration just left of the sternum, angry and red and weeping slowly. The ICU resident, a second-year named Chen with hands that trembled like aspen leaves, stood frozen at the bedside. "Where's the surgeon?" Chen's voice cracked across the intercom. The charge nurse didn't look up from the monitor. 28 minutes out. Beach traffic. We're calling his backup, his 30 minutes minimum. 30 minutes. Morrison's blood pressure was already dropping like a stone down a well. 88/45. 84/40. Each number was a second ticking away. The heart could only compress against itself for so long before compression became death. The monitor showed what everyone already knew, the sinus rhythm was deteriorating into patterns that belonged in textbooks about futility. Sarah's jaw clenched. The restraint wasn't fear. It was something else. It was the trembling of a body that had held intestines in the sand of Tikrit, that had done a field cricothyrotomy on a Marine with a shattered larynx, that had placed a needle into a man's chest in the dark while IEDs exploded 300 meters away. The trembling was her body remembering that it knew how to do this. The trembling was rage at the woman she'd pretended to be for 2 years. That's when Dr. Hargrove appeared. He moved with the deliberate slowness of a man who understood power, the power of position, of institutional authority, of the ability to decide who acted and who watched. He positioned himself between Sarah and the ICU unit door, blocking her path with the casual authority of someone who had never been questioned. His phone was already in his hand. "Not your patient, Ms. Chen." His voice was flat, conversational, the tone of a man explaining a rule to a child. "You're on medication inventory. Remember? We need to verify the controlled substances before the morning audit." Sarah didn't move. Didn't blink. The composure was a thing with its own weight now, a living shield between what she felt and what she showed. "He's crashing," she said. 8 words. Steady as a surgical laser. Which is precisely why we need certified personnel. Hargrove's eyes held a calculation, a chess move several turns deep. The resident is competent. The backup surgeon is en route. You will return to the medication room. Bed 7's monitor showed 76/32. Morrison's lips were beginning to turn blue, that particular shade of cyanosis that meant the oxygen wasn't moving, that the heart couldn't pump what it couldn't compress, that time had stopped being generous and started being a weapon. The ICU resident looked up. Looked directly at Sarah through the glass. His eyes were the eyes of someone drowning in real time, watching the water rise above his head. He had textbook knowledge. He had protocols. He did not have the hands-on experience of someone who had done this procedure while artillery fire lit up the night sky. Sarah turned to walk away. She made it exactly 3 steps before the monitor flatlined. That sound, that single sustained tone that doctors call asystole and nurses call the end, pulled her back around. The resident moved with panic now, reaching for the crash cart, calling for ACLS, performing chest compressions with the desperate rhythm of someone hoping medicine worked like CPR always did on television. But you couldn't compress your way out of tamponade. You couldn't massage a heart back to life when its own tissue was suffocating it. Dr. Hargrove was already dialing his phone, already composing the narrative. We have a critical situation. I need documentation that Senior Chief Petty Officer Chen is not certified for ICU procedures. I need witnesses to her insubordination. 45 seconds until brain damage. 90 seconds until death. Sarah moved. Not quickly. Not in panic. She moved the way she had moved through Tikrit, with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had already surrendered to what needed doing. She pushed past Hargrove, not roughly, not dramatically, just firmly. His arm came up to block her, and she simply walked through it the way you walk through a curtain, and suddenly she was through the door and the air changed pressure around her because everyone knew, everyone could see, that the quiet nurse had become something else. The pericardiocentesis tray was on the crash cart. She had it open before anyone could process what was happening. 14-gauge angiocath needle. Sterile prep. Her hands moved on their own, the muscle memory emerging like a thing that had been sleeping just beneath the surface of her skin, waiting for permission to wake. What are you doing? The resident's voice was high, uncertain. Saving his life. She already had Morrison's chest exposed, already locating the needle entry point, the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the place where the pericardium lived. Chest compressions. Now. The resident started. No questions. Just compliance, because authority sounds like a woman who knows exactly where the needle needs to go. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, a sound like electricity holding its breath. Sarah's hands were steady as she angled the needle, as she felt for the resistance of the pericardium, as she felt that subtle give when the membrane surrendered. Blood came back into the syringe immediately. Dark blood. Held blood. Blood that shouldn't be outside the heart. 20 mils, she said. Then 30. 40. The monitor's flat line began to soften. A blip. A rhythm. A heartbeat that meant Morrison's heart could compress again because the prison had opened. 92/58. 102/61. The resident's hand stopped. We need to. Keep going. Sarah's voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a command. Call cardiothoracic. Tell them we have a penetrating pericardial laceration, successful needle decompression, but he needs operative intervention within the hour. She removed the needle. 75 seconds had passed since Morrison flatlined. His oxygen saturation was climbing, 84. 90. 96%. The color was returning to his lips in stages, from blue to gray to something almost human. Dr. Hargrove was still recording, his phone held at chest height, capturing everything. Sarah could see the satisfaction on his face, the documentation of insubordination, the evidence of scope violation, the paper trail that would destroy her career. She had just handed him everything he needed. She didn't flinch. Didn't turn away. She held his eyes while she peeled off her gloves and dropped them into the sharps container with the precision of someone making a point. Her hands had just violated 3 hospital policies, exceeded her scope of practice, and saved a man's life in front of a witness who was getting it all on video. Morrison's monitor showed a solid rhythm now. The backup surgeon was 8 minutes out. The resident was calling for the OR team to prepare for an emergency thoracotomy. I need some jello, Sarah said quietly, and turned toward the door. Hargrove stepped aside without thinking, the automatic movement of someone whose body understood what his mind was still processing. She walked past him into the corridor where the night was still holding its breath, where the rain outside the ER windows hammered against the glass like applause, where she had just ended her career and saved a man who had been with her son when she couldn't be. The quiet nurse was gone. And everybody in Mercy General knew it. The cardiac monitor shrieked at 02 for 7 hours. 3 short alarms, then silence. The kind of silence that stops time. Sarah's head came up from the medication cart before anyone else moved. Distended neck veins. Muffled heart sounds on auscultation. blood pressure dropping like a stone, 92, 88, 84. Morrison's eyes went wide. His lips moved but no sound came out. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardial sac was filling with blood, crushing his heart, killing him by degrees with every passing second. The surgeon was 30 minutes out. Maybe 45 if traffic on IE-64 was bad. They didn't have 30 seconds. Dr. Hargrove materialized at Morrison's bedside, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent glare. He ordered the residents to prepare for an emergency echo, a procedure that would take time they didn't have. His voice carried the tone of a man checking boxes, following protocol, watching the clock. Not saving a life. Just managing a case. Sarah moved to the supply cabinet. Her hand knew the way without thought. 18-gauge needle. 1 liter normal saline. A syringe. The equipment of a procedure that had no room for hesitation or doubt. Step back. Her voice was different now. Not a request. Not a question. The voice of someone who had watched men die because protocol was faster than action. Hargrove's face went rigid. Excuse me. He's going into cardiac arrest. Needle thoracostomy won't work. Pericardiocentesis. Now. You're a floor nurse, Ms. Chen. Stand down. But Sarah was already prepping Morrison's chest. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The exact anatomy of survival printed into her muscle memory by 1,000 field surgeries at FOB Shank, at Sanjin Valley, at the 121st Medical Support Facility in Tikrit where the dust never settled and the blood never stopped flowing. Her hands moved on their own. No tremor. No hesitation. Just precision born from necessity. The needle went in. The subtle resistance of pericardial tissue gave way. Dark blood, 60 milliliters of it, drained from the syringe into a sterile basin. Each drop was Morrison's heartbeat buying another second of life. His blood pressure climbed. 84 to 90. 90 to 100. The monitor rhythm steadied. His eyes focused. He looked at Sarah and something passed between them, the recognition of two people who spoke a language only they understood. Morrison's lips moved. A word so quiet the ventilator nearly swallowed it. Phantom. Sarah withdrew the needle and stepped back, the cardboard tray of bloody instruments in her hand. The ICU nurse stared at her. Hargrove stared at her. The resident stared at her. In that moment, the quiet nurse's mask had shattered like dropped glass, and nobody in that trauma bay was still looking at a floor nurse. They were looking at something else entirely. Sarah walked to the sink and disposed of the equipment. Water ran rust-colored and then clear. Her hands were steady under the running water. Muscle memory wasn't just about procedures. It was about composure. About never letting them see the cost. But that wasn't the worst part. Hargrove retreated from Morrison's bedside, his jaw tight, his eyes calculating. She could see it happening in real time, the realization that Sarah had just revealed capabilities that no hospital credential could justify. He pulled his phone before he'd even cleared the trauma bay doors. His private investigator would be waiting for a call. The Virginia Board of Nursing had a 24-hour hotline. The hospital board president owed him favors. And security could be called within minutes. Sarah knew because she'd seen men like Hargrove before. Officers who became threats when their authority was questioned. The response was always the same: destruction. Eliminate the threat. Erase the evidence. Move on. She made it until 0900 hours before security found her in the medication storage room, inventory sheets scattered across the desk. 3 folders in her hands. 3 years of careful documentation about discrepancies in pharmaceutical orders that didn't match patient census. The evidence she'd been collecting like a sailor collecting dead letters, knowing someday they'd matter. Your badge needs to be deactivated, the security guard said. His name was Patterson. He'd held a door for her once, 6 months ago. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. I understand. They walked her to her locker. She was permitted to remove her personal items. Everyone in the break room watched as she pulled out her spare scrubs, a water bottle with her name on the label, a tin of lip balm. The items of a woman living a quiet life in the shadows. At the bottom of the locker, folded beneath everything else, were the combat boots. Desert tan. Worn at the heel. Scuffed at the toe from 12 years of running across terrain that tried to kill her. The boots from Tikrit. The boots from the day everything changed. The security guard watched her place them in the cardboard box. Hargrove stood in the administrative hallway, arms crossed, his face arranged in an expression of regret. "I'm sorry it came to this. But we have standards." Sarah didn't respond. Responding would have required her to care about his narrative. Instead, she carried the cardboard box past him, past the morning shift nurses who suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere, past the lobby where the glass doors opened onto a Norfolk parking lot and a world that no longer had a place for her. 3 days later, she sat in the waiting room of the VA hospital in Hampton, a psychiatry intake appointment scheduled for 1,430 hours. The walls were the color of old bruises. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical prayer. Around her sat men and women in various states of survival, missing limbs, missing parts of themselves that didn't show. One man had the Tikrit dust still in the creases of his jacket despite the Virginia humidity. Sarah recognized the look. The 1,000-yard stare. The expression of someone who had been somewhere that the body never fully left. They didn't recognize her. 3 men she had treated in the 121st Medical Support Facility sat within 10 feet of her in their civilian clothes, and their eyes passed over her without acknowledgement. She wasn't in uniform. She didn't have a call sign. She was just another woman in scrubs waiting for someone to decide if she was salvageable. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been true. A nurse called her name. Sarah stood and followed her down a hallway that smelled like old coffee and institutional desperation. The psychiatrist was a kind man with tired eyes. He asked her questions about sleep, about suicidal ideation, about the incident that had brought her to this moment. She answered with the precision of a medical professional describing someone else's symptoms. "You were medically discharged?" he asked. "Medical separation. PTSD. Tremor in my hands. Made it difficult to do fine motor work. And now you're experiencing re-traumatization." Sarah looked at her hands. "Steady now." The tremor that had been her constant companion for 2 years had vanished the moment she picked up that needle at 02 for 7 hours. Her hands had remembered exactly who they were supposed to be. "I'm experiencing clarity," she said. That might be the problem. Then the phone rang in the administrative offices somewhere down the corridor. Then another phone. Then a voice on the hospital intercom requesting that Dr. James Hargrove report to the administrator's office immediately. Except Hargrove wasn't there anymore. He hadn't been there since the moment Captain Morrison opened his eyes and whispered a single word that nobody at Mercy General was supposed to understand. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It brought the hospital to its knees. The mahogany conference table gleamed under recessed lighting, its surface polished to mirror brightness. Dr. Hargrove sat centered like a conductor before an orchestra, his posture radiating the absolute certainty of a man who had never lost a battle he chose to fight. To his left and right, hospital board members arranged themselves in descending order of institutional power: the board president, the chief financial officer, 2 peer physicians who owed Hargrove consulting fees, and the hospital's legal counsel shuffling papers stamped with confidential letterheads. The walls themselves seemed designed to intimidate, lined with photographs of past hospital administrators and framed medical diplomas earning 6 figures annually. Fluorescent panels cast everything in surgical white, a light that made skin look cadaverous and shadows appear sinister. Hargrove slid a manila folder across the polished wood. Inside, falsified incident reports, fabricated witness statements from nurses he'd coached, pharmacy records doctored to suggest Sarah Chen had accessed controlled substances outside standard protocols. The documentation was meticulous, the kind of work that came from a man who understood that bureaucracy moved on paper, not truth. "Pattern of erratic behavior," Hargrove said, his voice like a tank idling in a garage, low, menacing, impossible to ignore. 3 separate occasions accessing narcotics beyond her normal duties. Documentation here, here, and here. His index finger stabbed each page. I consulted with our pharmaceutical director. The discrepancies are flagrant. A safety liability we cannot afford to ignore, particularly given her apparent psychiatric instability and the nature of her aggressive responses during the Morrison incident. The board president's face remained neutral, trained by decades of liability management. Dr. Hargrove, you initially called this an emergency based on her competence during the trauma intervention. Initial assessment was incomplete, Hargrove interrupted, leaning forward with the practiced confidence of a man who had weaponized protocol against 3 previous whistleblowers. What I've since discovered is far more troubling. The pericardiocentesis was reckless. Disobeying direct orders. Operating under the influence of substances her tox screen will reveal once we have it properly analyzed. I took it upon myself to have her blood drawn at the VA facility where she was admitted. Results pending, but I anticipate. The conference room door swung open. Not knocked. Opened with the force of someone who had spent 2 decades moving through doors that never asked permission. The ICU nurse stood breathing hard, her badge still clipped to her scrubs, her face the color of someone who had just run through 3 hospital corridors. You need to stop, she said directly to Hargrove, then turned to the board president. Captain Morrison regained consciousness 20 minutes ago. First thing he did was ask for Senior Chief Chen. When I told him she wasn't here, he grabbed my wrist, hard, and said one word, Phantom. She paused. Let that word sit in the mahogany silence like a detonated device. I don't know what it means, but every officer on trauma call went very still when I asked. They said it was a call sign. A classified call sign. They said if that was his code for a medical provider, it meant he was verifying someone's special operations status. They said I needed to tell this board immediately. The room's air pressure changed. Hargrove's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but perceptibly. The board president's expression shifted from neutral to something harder. What is this call sign's significance? Before anyone could answer, the second door opened. Not burst, opened with the controlled precision of military protocol. Sarah's son stepped through in army dress blues, his rank insignia catching the fluorescent light. Captain David Chen. Fort Bragg. 82nd Airborne. His eyes found the board president directly, his voice level and measured like still water, that Senior Chief Petty Officer Chen, sir. My mother. 12 years active duty. 3 tours Tikrit and Kandahar. Her call sign was Phantom because her tactical medical intervention saved lives that should have been lost. She was the best trauma medic in her battalion. The only medic command ever cleared to perform field procedures independently. That pericardiocentesis your doctor is claiming was reckless. She performed the same procedure blind, without imaging, on 17 combat wounded under fire. 17 lives. No deaths. Hargrove's face drained of color like someone pulling a plug. The third arrival announced itself not with sound but with presence. A SEAL team leader in dress blues appeared in the doorway, his uniform carrying the weight of command that made junior officers straighten involuntarily. His voice carried the timbre of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm here to verify qualifications for a medical provider listed under the call sign Phantom. For Captain Morrison's care record and for federal purposes. He nodded to the board president. Your hospital did not conduct proper vetting when Senior Chief Chen was hired. She held a Level 5 clearance through Joint Special Operations Command. She maintained current trauma certification through the Naval Medical Institute. Her decorations include 2 Bronze Stars, 1 for direct action in Fallujah and 1 for medical innovation under combat conditions. He paused. Let each detail land separately. A Purple Heart for wounds sustained evacuating casualties under enemy fire. And the Distinguished Service Medal for coordinating the extraction of 17 wounded personnel from Tikrit's Jolan district during the 2008 offensive. The SEAL's eyes moved to Hargrove. Your hospital's negligence in credentialing and your subsequent actions constitute grounds for federal investigation into violation of military personnel protection statutes. The conference room door opened again. Not a person this time. An FBI agent in a dark suit carrying a briefcase that seemed to contain the actual weight of consequence. Behind him, another suit. The Virginia Board of Medicine's investigator. The agent opened the briefcase on the mahogany table and spread documents like a hand of cards no one wanted to hold, bank statements for offshore accounts in Grand Cayman, wire transfer records showing pharmaceutical distributors routing payments to shell corporations, Medicare billing documents for patients who never existed at Mercy General, hospital supply manifests with quantities that didn't match actual inventory, and, most damning, Hargrove's personal emails documenting his methods with clinical precision, as if he'd been maintaining a how-to manual for fraud. Dr. Marcus Hargrove, the FBI agent said with the flat certainty of someone delivering sentences, "We have enough documentation of billing fraud to charge you with 53 counts of healthcare fraud, 15 counts of money laundering through your daughter's registered nonprofit, and conspiracy to commit extortion. The private investigator you hired has provided a deposition to avoid charges himself. He's detailed how you fabricated evidence against 3 previous employees, 2 nurses and a resident, who questioned pharmaceutical discrepancies. One of those nurses was prosecuted for diversion she didn't commit. She spent 9 months fighting the charges. That case is now being reopened." The agent gestured to the documents. "Your network is dissolving as we speak. Your wife's attorneys filed for divorce this morning. Your malpractice insurance carrier dropped coverage based on preliminary findings. The Virginia Board of Medicine is suspending your license pending formal investigation." Hargrove opened his mouth. Nothing emerged but the sound of a man whose entire architecture had been detonated simultaneously from multiple angles. His hands rested on the mahogany table, and for the first time, Sarah could have walked in and witnessed genuine fear in his expression, not the fear of consequence, but the specific paralysis of someone watching the infrastructure of his power dissolve in real time. The board president's voice was careful, controlled, the voice of institutional self-preservation. "Dr. Hargrove, you are relieved of all duties pending investigation. Security will escort you from the building." Sarah's son remained standing at attention, his uniform a stark contrast to Hargrove's suddenly ordinary clothes. The SEAL team leader watched with the expression of someone accustomed to witnessing consequences. The FBI agent closed his briefcase with a sound like a door slamming on something irretrievable. 6 weeks later, the same security guard who had handed Sarah her cardboard box in the hallway, the one containing her spare scrubs and her combat boots, appeared at Hargrove's side in the hospital lobby. In his hands, an identical box. The guard's voice was flat, professional, stripped of any emotion except absolute finality. "Your severance package, Dr. Hargrove. Final paycheck, revoked medical license documentation, and information regarding your legal counsel. I believe you know the way out, sir." Hargrove walked past the nurses' station where he had held court for 7 years, where nurses had learned to avoid eye contact when he approached. He passed the cafeteria where he had humiliated Sarah Chen in front of 40 hospital employees. He moved through automatic doors that opened without recognition toward a leased sedan that would be repossessed within 8 days when his credit accounts froze under investigation. That evening, he sat in a Virginia Beach motel room and accepted a plea agreement that would result in 18 months minimum security followed by restitution that would consume the remainder of his professional earnings. Meanwhile, in the Norfolk night, Sarah Chen returned to Mercy General's night shift in her scrubs, her hands as steady as they had been in Tikrit when her hands had meant the difference between living and not living. For the first time in 2 years, her combat boots sat visible in her hospital locker, the worn leather catching fluorescent light. Her name tag now read, Senior Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen, RN. The hospital had offered reinstatement with back pay, formal apology, and something far more valuable, endowed her position as trauma education specialist, specifically for veteran nurses. She accepted on one condition only, that every veteran staff member would have access to PTSD screening and mental health support, no questions asked, no judgment, no career consequences. Captain Morrison, recovered and returned to active duty, sent her a photograph from Fort Bragg, a memorial dedication ceremony with 17 names engraved. One of them was David Chen. The photograph showed Morrison standing at attention beside Sarah's nephew, both of them rigid in formal dress, both of them bearing witness. On the back, Morrison had written 2 words, "Phantom remembers." Sarah kept that photograph in her locker beside her boots, and every night shift, when her hands performed procedures that saved lives in the Norfolk darkness, she understood something fundamental that most people never realize: the quietest person in any room might be the one holding everything together. The first new veteran nurse Sarah trained was a former Army medic with a tremor in his left hand and eyes that had seen things he couldn't speak about. On his second shift, when he froze during a trauma intake, Sarah moved beside him and said nothing, just placed her steady hand on his shoulder, communicating in the language of someone who understood that recovery was measured in small increments. "You've got this," she said simply. "I'll be right here." That was all he needed. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub, saving lives in the dark. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel and never miss a moment when the quiet person in the room changes everything. Comment below, would you have trusted your identity to someone who might betray it, or would you have stayed hidden forever?